All right, in this video, we are picking up from the second half of chapter 11 of Isaiah. If you have not listened to the first half of Isaiah 11, please do so, because this is just a mere continuation of it, just keeping the videos short for easier access. Verse 10, we just wrapped up the first section. Let's move on to verse 11, the second half of chapter 11. In that day, the Lord will extend his hand yet a second time to recover the remnant that remains of his people from Assyria, from Egypt, from Pathros, from Cush, from Elam, from Shinar, from Hamath, and from the coastlands of the sea. So if you noticed carefully, in that day the Lord will extend his hand yet a second time. We're moving here from the imagery of the root or the shoot of Jesse to the Lord's hand. Okay, the hand kind of oftentimes signifies personal involvement, and the Lord's hand, by the way, is a very it's used a lot in Exodus. In the book of Exodus, especially in the event of Exodus, where God often says he's going to stretch out his hand and rescue his people and so on. Also in Deuteronomy, when it recounts the story of Exodus. So we see this motif of Exodus here, and this will be important towards the end of the video, when I'm going to go and talk about the fulfillment of verses 10 and 11. So I haven't talked much about the fulfillment, when this was fulfilled, when will this be fulfilled, was this fulfilled, but wait till the end of the video, we'll talk about that. But just keep in mind, verse 11, we have this motif of Exodus sneaking in to this text. One more thing that needs to be discussed in verse 11 is the phrase "yet a second time." Yet a second time. This means it's a repeated action. God is gonna recover the remnant a second time, meaning He will have done another time in history. And once again, scholars will debate when that was and when this second time will be. I think the first time refers to the Exodus, and the second time will refer to the millennial kingdom. But let's save that, once again, let's save that fulfillment issue till the end of the chapter. And let's talk about the toponyms in verse 11. Assyria, Egypt, Pathros, Cush, Elam, Shinar, Hamath, coastlands of the sea. This list is meant to be comprehensive. What do I mean by this? Pathros. Where is Pathros? Well, you guys know Assyria and Egypt, so I skipped. But Assyria is in the northeast of Israel, Egypt in the southwest. So you got two diagonal opposite ends. Pathros. So where is Pathros? Pathros is in the lower Nile. So it's like north of Egypt, like near the Nile Delta area. Okay? Cush. Where is Cush? It's the other end of the Nile, in the upper Nile, meaning the south of Egypt. Okay, so both ends of the Nile River is given. Okay, Elam. Where's Elam? Elam is on the southeast. Elam and Shinar on the southeast end of Mesopotamia, so the rivers of Tigris and Euphrates, whereas Hamath is on the northwest. Okay, once again, giving two opposite ends to encompass the whole. The coastlands denote the west. So this is supposed to mean that the remnants will come from all corners of the earth. That's really what it means. Don't restrict the return of remnants to these strict geographic terms. It's from everywhere. We call that, anybody remember what this figure of speech is called? It's called merism. Merism. Remember this. This is the very first figure of speech that appears in the Bible in Genesis 1:1. God created the heavens and the earth. Heavens and the earth is a merism. It's both ends of the spectrum to encompass the whole. He didn't create just the heavens and just the earth, but also everything in between. Merism. All right, reading on. Verse 12. So what will happen in that day? He will raise a signal for the nations and will assemble the banished Israel and gather the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. Here we see that the second half of chapter 11, we are more specifically talking about the people of Israel and Judah, something we have never seen in the first half of chapter 11. Did you guys catch that? First half of chapter 11, we are like, the Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, the wolf shall dwell with the lamb, and so on. But we don't ever have tribes, Israel, Judah, Ephraim. But here in second half of 11, the implication of this coming of the stump of Jesse has a direct implication for the people of Israel. Okay? And God is going to bring them together from the nations. Verse 13, the jealousy of Ephraim shall depart, and those who harass Judah shall be cut off. Ephraim shall not be jealous of Judah, and Judah shall not harass Ephraim. Do you guys remember one of the sins that Isaiah recounted? A sin that caused judgment to come upon Israel was because the tribes were fighting against each other. The brotherly love was not there. And it talked about how Manasseh is fighting against Ephraim. Remember, Manasseh and Ephraim were the sons of Joseph. They come from the same father, and they're fighting against each other. And it develops into Ephraim and Judah. Ephraim and Judah, also sons of Jacob, they fight against each other. So there's no unity. The brothers are fighting against each other. But when the stump of Jesse comes, they will no longer be jealous of each other or harass one another. So there's going to be peace that comes from this stump of Jesse. Verse 14, but they shall swoop down on the shoulder of the Philistines in the west, and together they shall plunder the people of the east. They shall put out their hand against Edom and Moab, and the Ammonites shall obey them. So Israelites will subdue their enemies and gain the whole promised land in that day when the stump of Jesse would come. Verse 15, and the Lord will utterly destroy the tongue of the sea of Egypt, and will wave his hand over the river with his scorching breath, and strike it into 7 channels, and he will lead people across in sandals. And there will be a highway from Assyria for the remnant that remains of his people, as there was for Israel when they came up from the land of Egypt. What does the phrase tongue of the sea mean in verse 15? Tongue of the sea of Egypt. The Lord will destroy the tongue of the sea of Egypt. Tongue can mean really any bay or any gulf, bodies of water in Egypt. Okay, so bodies of water in Egypt and Euphrates will be dried up so people can walk across. Okay, so that they can come in sandals. Verse 15 at the end, he will lead people across in sandals. The rivers that they will have to cross will be dried up so much that they can just cross without taking their shoes off. Okay, once again, this is remember what happened in the Red Sea, right? Splitting of the Red Sea, they walked on dry ground. So this is what God does, and he did so again in Joshua's time when he stopped the river of Jordan, and something like that in a similar manner will happen when he comes again. So that was chapter 11, and let's now go back to the topic of fulfillment. This issue of fulfillment is one of the reasons why studying the books of the prophets is a little difficult. You need to know, first of all, when the prophecy was given, to know when the fulfillment is to be expected, and so on. But let's focus on verses 10 and 11. This is where the crux lies. In that day, the root of Jesse, who shall stand as a signal for the peoples, of him shall the nations inquire, and his resting place shall be glorious. Verse 11, in that day the Lord will extend his hand yet a second time to recover the remnant that remains of his people from Assyria, from Egypt, from Pathros, from Cush, from Elam, from Shinar, from Hamath, and from the coastlands of the sea. Yet a second time is what really gives a hard time for people. Okay, I'll just offer you one way of understanding. Verse 10 was fulfilled, will be fulfilled in the millennium. Okay? When the millennium is about to begin, people will come, nations will come and worship God. Okay? And verse 11. When are the two regatherings of the people? First one happened with Zerubbabel, when the Babylonian exiles came back. The second gathering will happen when the Messiah comes. In other words, when Messiah rules on earth, that is when God's hand will stretch yet a second time to recover the remnant. Okay? That's how I kind of understand it. But as I said, this is a little debated. It's a little difficult. Some believe the first initial fulfillment came with the first coming of Jesus, and it will be fully realized with the second coming of Jesus. Does that make sense? But the problem with understanding the first advent as the fulfillment of verse 10, the problem is that it says, his resting place shall be glorious. His resting place shall be glorious. But in the first coming of Jesus, his resting place wasn't very glorious, right? It was crucifixion. That's why I think verse 10 awaits to be fulfilled in the second coming. People who would say, no, it occurred in the first coming. His resting place shall be glorious happened in heaven, where Jesus sits on the right hand of the Father. That's what's being referred to when Isaiah says his resting place shall be glorious. Another way people would defend this viewpoint is that, no, his resting place is glorious in the church. The believers believe, of course, and respect Jesus, that within the church, within the universal church, this stump of Jesse's resting place is glorious. So this is the viewpoint of the amillennialists. They take this and interpret this in a spiritual way, kind of figurative way, metaphorical way. I do not see that to be the case personally. When he returns, I think when Jesus returns, Jerusalem will become glorious because he will rule there. That's how. So I'm a little more literalistic in this approach. By the way, there's a third way to approach. I feel like I'm all over the place in discussing the fulfillment because maybe I need to be more organized in my head self. But liberal scholars see the fulfillment of verse 10 as a return from Babylon. But the problem is that it can't be, because the coming of the nations to the root of Jesse never happened in that return from Babylonian exiles. So long story short, summarizing, I believe this verse 10 will happen right at the beginning of the millennial kingdom, where the nations will come and inquire, and Jesus' resting place will be glorious. And verse 11 will also happen in the millennial beginning of it, when God's people, Israel, will be gathered from four corners of the earth, also to glorify God and worship together in Zion. And I believe this is what Paul was referring to in Romans 11. That the second regathering is what Paul is talking about in Romans 11, when all Israel will be saved. So that is chapter 11. I hope you enjoyed it. It's a very beautiful picture. It's a beautiful picture because it talks about the amazing aspects of the branch, the stump of Jesse, and the great things that will happen on that day, in that day. In that day has always been used in a negative sense for judgment and destruction, discipline. But in that day, there's something good going to happen when the Messiah comes, and there's going to be restoration. But this is not the end. Chapter 12 continues on. So tune in for the next video. Next video is going to be about the songs that these people will sing when all these things happen.